Hello, and welcome to the Women in Leadership Talk podcast. I'm excited to have you here today. We've got Nilzara Rivera joining us from Chesapeake, Virginia. Nilzara, I'm so excited to have you. And I hesitated for just a second there because I wanted to make sure I pronounced your name correctly. So welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here and just to share the space with you and just chit chat.
Well, so am I, and so is our audience. And let's just take a moment and thank our audience for joining us. Nilzara has, a very interesting background, which we're going to get into in just a moment. But I think, from this conversation today, you're going to learn a lot about trauma and how we can approach trauma. And, this is not to make anybody sad. This is to really, inspire and create hope as to we have a lot of resilience in us, and Nilzara is going to share her story with us today, so we're super grateful for that. And I know that's not always an easy thing to do and takes courage, so appreciate you coming forward and joining us.
Yeah, of course. If I could be assistance to anybody and just to kind of help them not have to go through the craze I went to get where I'm at today, then by all means, I will share all the things.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
of
That's very
course.
giving. Yes. Well, let me give the audience a little bit of background as to what you do and just some insight so they know why we're talking to you today.
Okay.
So Nilzara is an international best-selling author and an intimate partner violence recovery coach. And I'll say that again because I think that's really important. She's an intimate partner violence recovery coach. She is an intuitive, trauma-informed spiritual practitioner and has a passionate connection with God. Her transformational coaching is sought out by those who have survived all types of unhealthy and abusive relationships.
Mm.
And she guides women who have endured intimate partner violence to reclaim their mind, their heart, and their cookie. So we're going to talk a little bit about that
Yeah,
as
of
they go
course.
through their spiritual journey. She has many certifications, but really, I think what's most impactful here is your own life experience. And that's what really has made you this exceptional coach. She herself has lived through molestation, rape, an alcoholic father, and multiple abusive relationships and marriages. But she chose to actually heal. And so today we're going to talk about that and let you share just some of your story with, what's happened to you and how you found the courage and the resiliency to navigate some of the things that have happened. So let's start there. Let's just talk about your story and how this all began.
So I would say that the biggest pivotal moment, there was a lot that's happened in my childhood, and I didn't know how unstable my childhood was because we're young and we don't really know what's going on because we live in it, so it's normal to us. So there was a lot going on. My mom was kind of a party animal and my dad was home all the time, but I didn't know that he was home all the time because he couldn't keep a job, or there was just a lot of instability at home. So with my dad staying home often, I became a daddy's girl.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my best friend. No matter what happened, he would always make things better. And if I would be sad because my mom was gone, my dad would be like, it's okay. We'll watch a movie and we'll get some snacks. And so back then it was like HBO was on channel 5 and sometimes it would be free, and we would get on there and watch whatever movie was showing, and we would have like potted meat with bread, and that was just like the highlight. We're like, woohoo, this is so much fun, and he just made things better. And so when my parents divorced, it really kind of just annihilated him. It really destroyed him in my sense. And I was not prepared at all for what was to come after this. So he became an addict. He became opiates, alcohol, women. I mean, a completely different person. We were no longer priority because it was me and my little sister. And that is what really kind of just changed the whole dynamic. It skewed how I envisioned love to be. I became a mom at, the age of 13, because now I'm taking care of this grown man who is an alcoholic. So I didn't have the opportunity in those vital years to become like an individual. I
Mm.
became a mom at this super young age. So it didn't matter what my needs were. I had to take care of my dad. And so I didn't learn who I was as an individual. It skewed love and it normalized dysfunction. So that totally trickled into my adult life, my teen years, my adult life, and really just made like this perfect fertile ground for me just to love douchebags my whole life. And
Of course. Well, that's what you saw, right? That's what you had lived. Well, not saying that your father was a douchebag, but those examples, what your role model was, showed you that that was the normal, right? And not realizing that that wasn't the normal.
yeah, absolutely. And my father was never physically abusive, but there was other things like neglectful, mentally
Sure.
abusive, those types of things. And so that
Emotionally.
trickled on, yes. And I got myself into relationship after relationship where it was just toxic and abusive. I experienced all types of abuse, from sexual to emotional to financial to reproductive. Like I've experienced it almost all. I can't say that um, I've experienced like the shelter portion of it, of leaving and having kids. That's probably the only part that I don't necessarily resonate with some, because I have not had kids with any of my abusers.
Right.
And so that part I haven't experienced, but I have experienced all of this other stuff and multiple marriages. I had been married 3 times within an 8-year time span. If you really break that down, that's kind of a mess. So
Well, it sounds like you were searching, right? Like you lost your father and you became the mother to him. And
yes.
it sounds like he had gone into a spiral to help numb his own pain,
For sure.
and not able to take care of you and your sister. And that's tough. And so yeah, you probably were trying to find your own father figure in the marriages. And I can't even imagine, Nilzara, how difficult that was. And sorry to interrupt you. I just,
No, that's okay.
like, a lot of things are going through my head as you're speaking. And so you went through 3 marriages. Those didn't work, and you didn't have children, so that was good. But you also had your little sister, that you
Yes.
were helping take care of, right?
Right. And I'm still married to the third one. So there is that one.
Okay,
It's
that's
just the two
good.
previous ones that were kind of were a hot mess. Like, let's not even downplay it. It was just a hot mess across the board for sure. So yeah, so I've been married, a couple of times. I just didn't know how to be single. I didn't know how to be my own individual self. I
Mm.
felt like I had to be with somebody in order to feel valued. And I had this warped thought process that I can love somebody into loving me. I could become like the most perfect person that you need me to become. And in that, it was like an exchange. If I do A, B, C, and D, then you're going to love me.
Mm.
So I never had my own personality. I just kind of morphed into whatever these guys wanted. And even being what they wanted, it still wasn't good enough.
Mm.
Still wasn't good enough. And I found myself experiencing the same feelings and emotions of neglect and feeling unworthy and worthless in every relationship. So the abuse might have been different, the face looked a little bit different, but the end result was supporting my internal thought process. And so it just magnified that, yes, this is what you are, because look at all these things are
Oh,
in
wow. Yeah.
support of that. And so it was really difficult for me. And it wasn't until my second marriage where I was just like, I can't do this. anymore. And I had to humbly accept the fact that I was the common denominator in all of the craziness I had experienced. And not that it was my fault, the things that were happening, but I wasn't taking responsibility for my healing. So I wasn't seeing red flags because I grew up in red flags. So
Sure.
things had to be like on fire to
Yeah,
burnt
yeah.
to a crisp for me to be like, huh, I think something's wrong here. You know, things had to be like ablaze for me to be like, oh, this is not okay. I think it's time for me to leave, you know? So it just, I couldn't do it anymore. You know, I was in my 30s and here we are again in this repeated cycle. And that's when I decided to heal, to really sit in my shit and own it all and then hash it out. So yeah.
Well, that's incredible. Like, I mean, just the fact that you had that awareness and that you started to look at what are the patterns, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and that you're the common denominator and taking responsibility for that. And to your point, I think this is a really important comment. It's not about blaming yourself. Like, you didn't ask for these things to happen, but it's recognizing that it is happening and that what can I do about it? Like, because oftentimes, and to your point, even because the way you grew up, you didn't have a different model to look at. And so
Right.
how did you start to recognize that the patterns were not serving you and that you had to make a change?
A loaded question. Give me a second. um, I, you know, again, I just found myself in a relationship where I did, in my mind, I felt like I did everything right. So there's this kind of like skewed hot mess going on in my brain, right? So we've introduced the dynamics of abuse and all of these things, upbringing. And not only that, there was culture. So culture, Hispanic culture, Puerto Rican, is very much like kind of that ride or die mentality. 100%. You know, you're the wife and you do all the things for the husband, and that's how you're a good wife, you know, and in your relationship, that's your number one, right? If he cheats, that means you did something wrong. Like,
Wow.
yeah. So
Okay.
there's a lot of responsibility that I was taught to take on that wasn't my responsibility, you know.
Sure.
And then the religious aspect of things as well, and this is more particular with the marriages, is that my body is no longer mine. And, you know, I have to pray harder. I have to submit. I have to do all of these things. So again, it's like reiterating and supporting that thought process that I have to be something that's not me. Does that make sense?
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so in that, I had all of these dynamics in my mind, and I'm like, I'm doing everything perfectly. I waited to have sex until I was married. We did Bible studies before we got married, and even in the little relationships in between, I talked about God and I did all of these things, and I'm still here. What is happening, you know? And so in all of this, I learned that I wasn't allowing myself to have a human experience. It was like I was jumping to like the supernatural aspect of Christianity where it's like God is so good and I'm perfect, you know?
Mm.
And I was never really taught to go through the emotions because that's normal. You know, it was
Sure.
more
That's what's
of like,
expected.
yeah, it's more of like culturally, you can't say much. It's okay to be angry and like fight and throw things around and then brush things under the rug. And then religious wise, if you're angry or if you're all of these things, then you must not be Christ-like. and then I
Wow.
already lacked identity. So it was just like this smorgasbord of like craziness in my brain
Yeah, well,
that I
that's a
was,
lot of pressure.
yeah, absolutely, hands down. And so I was trying to make all these dynamics fit in and work.
Mhm.
And it just obviously wasn't, it was repeat after repeat after repeat. Like I said, of the same relationship, maybe obviously different faces, and the abuse was different. Maybe it was more sexual, and this one it was a little bit more heavier. And then this one I had, a combination of things, but I couldn't do it anymore. I was like, whatever I'm doing isn't right. It
Mhm.
is not right because I have not had anything successful. I'm not feeling like this, how a Christian is supposed to feel like, and I'm being abused and I don't know what's going on. So I really had to detach and start like this unlayering of the people that I've created myself to be in order to sustain dysfunction.
Wow.
So yeah, I hope
Good
I
for
answered
you
your
though.
question.
Oh, wow. So how have you, because I'm sure our audience is sitting here going, "Oh my gosh, I can relate to different aspects of what you're sharing." And how do you begin that transition or transformational process? Moving from not feeling worthy to feeling worthy and not
Sure.
feeling, even looking for that external love when it's really the internal love that you
Right.
had to develop, right? So
Mhm.
how did you start to, transition from being the victim to being in the space of I am going to survive. I'm going to love me.
Right. So I had to accept that healing doesn't look, there's no black and white map to healing. It is, to me, I've discovered that it's more of like a lifelong commitment, and that there is no, to release the expectations of what it's supposed to look like, the length of time, just the expectations of it in general. And, but to be open to it, be like, okay, I'm open to this healing, God, and whatever you need from me, like, I just believe that you'll bring it to me when the time is right. I think sometimes we try to rush things when we're not ready, or we go through one phase of the healing and then we're like, oh, we're good. We moved through that. However, for those of us who are chronically in trauma, we have to give ourselves some grace and know that this is going to be a process. Some things are going to, like that, all you had to do was just talk about it. It's processed, the energy is moved, and you're good. And then there's other things that have been a part of us for so long that if we were to extract all of that at once, who are we? Now we're going to go through an identity crisis, like a
Sure.
hard one, right?
Yeah.
We kind of go through an identity crisis anyways, but if we go too fast, it will put us in a place where we're going to want to go back to what's comfortable.
Yeah.
So there's a chance of us kind of retracting and being like, oh, this is too much. But if we release the expectations and have faith that God, higher power, source will naturally bring things forward for us when we're ready to see the things that we need to see and to deal with, then it kind of takes that pressure off and it relieves us. And we can go a little bit deeper the next time.
Mhm.
So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. So what I heard there is that it's a process, number one, and you got to give yourself that the patience and the grace to navigate slowly in order for it to be sustainable. That's what I heard.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. That
yeah,
sustainability, if we have to think about it this way, the more trauma we've been through, the more protected our brain is of us.
of
So
course.
we have to do things slowly to where the brain is not going to be like, what is this? Ah, and
Yeah,
start bringing in the fear and the judgment and all of that, because those are the things that are going to bring us to safety. And sometimes our safety is not healthy,
yeah,
it's just normal.
yeah.
So we have to, not saying that we're not going to experience those things at all if we take our time, but we'll be more in control of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And I think
Yes.
something else you shared just a moment ago about how it's easy to slip back into that because that's what and so even though it's not healthy, it can feel normal or comfortable. And I
Yes.
think statistically, even if we look at like domestic violence, statistically an abused victim will go back 7 times.
Right.
And so
Correct.
that's kind of what you're describing, is that's that comfort zone, even though it's not a healthy comfort zone. And so giving yourself the space and the grace to, take little steps and get comfortable with those little steps, that can
Yes.
help you to sustain it over the long run.
Right. Right. The littler the steps, the more control we feel, and then the easier it's going to be to release when things need to be released. Another thing that is huge is also obviously support, therapy, coaching, energy work. There's not one modality that I say is better than the other.
Yeah.
It's all about the season that you're in. I would say go to energy work if you don't necessarily want to talk about your stuff, but you want to start your stuff. Like you want to start healing. This is a great way to start the healing process because you don't need words. I'm connected. If I'm going to do energy work on a client, I'm connected to God. He already knows what it is that you need. So let's just have you have a moment of relaxation and let God do the work, right? So energy work is going to be great for those that want to start the process, but they're not ready verbally. Therapy, things like EMDR. And then if there's any diagnoses attached to the trauma that you have, it's important that you get treatment for those too. And then, of course, coaching is very intimate. I think coaching is more intimate than therapy is. And sometimes we just need that extra connection. So really, realistically, whatever season it is that you need, don't be afraid to get the help that you need. Like I'm in therapy every other week still, and I do energy work as well. Like it's super important to have that support. Support groups are great as well. And then one thing to add is your thoughts, feelings, and emotions are your friends. In trauma, we learn to depart from them because we're told we're crazy or you're going crazy, you're over exaggerating, you're too emotional. So we tend to cut those parts of us off. But if we learn to use them and be in tuned with them, they actually tell us what we need to be nourished.
Well,
And yeah,
yeah. And it sounds like that's also what helped you make that transformation, because you did get in tune with what your thoughts and feelings and emotions were.
yes.
And I would agree with you 100%. No matter what the scenario is, like you can't just cut that off because it's going to get louder and louder and louder until you do acknowledge it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. That's very powerful. And so I know that, we've talked about a lot of things here.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that we haven't talked about that are important for individuals who might be listening, that either they know someone who is in a similar type situation? It could be domestic violence, it could be sexual abuse, it could be they've experienced, different traumas in their life. Like, what else do we need to share with them to help them find their path?
So many things I could say. So you cut me off whenever because I can talk a lot.
It's all good.
um,
Keep talking.
if you're a friend of somebody and you're watching this, sometimes all it takes is you pulling them aside and discussing things with them. However, if the friend has been in chronic trauma or if they're already in too deep, I ask that as a friend, you acknowledge the fact that when we are in trauma, especially in domestic violence situations, IPV situations, there is a brain warping that happens. And our brain is not functioning at the capacity it should be to see red flags, to understand what you're trying to tell us. We don't know because we're in it. And for those of us that are chronically in it, it's not like we've been healthy all day all our life. And then we just met somebody that knew how to tweak his way in or her way in. You know, when you've dealt with somebody who has chronically been in these types of things, you have to understand that our thought process is very skewed. It is important, though, that we don't feel necessarily alone, because that is what the abuser wants. He wants us to be alone. He wants your
Absolutely.
friend to
Hmm.
be alone, you know? So things that you can tell your friend is like, hey, remember that your mind, your heart, and your cookie, which is vagina, your vulva, sensuality, these are things that don't need to be sacrificed in order to sustain something healthy. These are things that should actually be very protected. And in a healthy relationship, they will be protected. They're very sacred for us. And so we should not be sacrificing our boundaries, the things that we love, our mental health, sex, anything like that in order to sustain healthiness. That's something you can bring to a friend. Using the word cookie kind of softens things sometimes for those of us that have been in chronic trauma, because if you bring up vagina and all these things, it's like, ah, right?
Too
So
much.
yeah, it's too much, right? So when we bring things like that, hey, just remember that your mind, heart, and your cookie should be protected. You know, you always have a friend here if you need something. We don't ever want them to feel isolated, because that is the agenda. That is the goal of the abuser, is to make them feel alone. So all they have is the abuser. It's kind of that psychology breakdown that happens, that psychological breakdown that happens in order to keep your friend in that abusive relationship.
Yeah.
So, somebody that is in an abusive relationship, we can talk to them all day sometimes, and it's like they're not getting it, they're not understanding, but I promise one day it will.
Yeah.
One day we step back and be like, yo, that's what she was saying. That's what it was. And when we are ready, we will leave, because everybody has
A breaking point.
a breaking point. I
Yeah.
just pray for those that are really in super physically abusive relationships. Like, I pray that you find a way to leave as soon as possible. There's certain relationships where I'm like, okay, so make a plan, start stashing money, start stashing food, contact a friend or a family member. So when you have that second to break free, you have somewhere to go, you have food, you have all the documentation of your kids, like important documents, you have them scanned, you have them emailed to you, you have everything that you need in line. So when the opportunity opens, you can leave. But there are relationships that don't have that little bit of grace, where it's like they have to leave right now.
Yeah.
If you want to survive and you want to live, you need to leave right now. And that means leaving everything else, you know? So that's the hard part. But for those of you that can kind of finagle a way to start $5 here, $1 here, open up your own account somehow over here. You could do that online. You know, there's a lot of things that you can do to start your own process. And another thing, remember that if you leave and you come back, the abuse is going to probably be a little bit harder this time, because now he really can't trust you. You left once. Now, what are you up to? So you thought the abuse and the controllingness and stuff was hard the first time. And every time you go back, it's going to get worse.
Yeah.
So
That's that you said so many things there that I want to take a moment and just really jump into, if it's okay. Because
yes,
I
of
think,
course.
in the beginning when you were sharing that, I think what you shared is so important with respect to the brain is not connecting with what your friend is trying to share with you. And so, as friends, because we care and we don't want to see you in this place, we're often quick to give advice and we're not living in your shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, sometimes that can feel, even though it's probably the intention is coming from a place of love and care and concern, I'm sure sometimes it can feel like judgment as well.
Right.
Right. And so, as a friend in this situation, it's really important for us to listen and to create that safe space, not giving advice so much, because that's our tendency as human beings. We want to help, right? So we give advice. And if I'm wrong on that, Nilzara, like, correct me, because that's just my opinion, that, you can't hear it. And so it's acknowledging and validating what that person is telling you without trying to impose your own belief system on
Right.
them.
Right.
And knowing they have a safe space or a safe person to go to and to share with.
Right. And I think so there's this dynamic, right? You have the friend that cares and loves and is giving, 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 like do all these things, but you're not listening, and it causes frustration.
Sure.
Right. So when we come with just a listening ear, first of all, this friend, if I'm the friend, I need to have healthy boundaries when it comes to my hot mess friend. Right. To my
Good
friend
point.
that,
Yes.
right. So pick up the phone when you have a moment. Pick up the phone. Hey, I can't talk right now, but later on tonight at 8 o'clock, I'll have 20 minutes. Right. So I have to have really good boundaries for a friend that is in this kind of chaotic place, because that's what it is. We're kind of like in this like chaosness and we don't understand, but somebody on the outside is like, whoa, what is happening? So as a good friend, I do say, you don't have to pick up the phone every single time that they call, or you can say, hey, I got your voicemail, right? Texting. I just want you to know that I'm here for you. I'm really busy right now. But let's set up a time to talk. I'll have 20 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever. So those are good things too. So the other person knows that there's a communication there. And then if we're not giving advice and we're just listening, it's not exuberating all this energy that we're pouring into somebody that isn't necessarily receiving. So it's going to preserve the relationship a little bit more when it's just a simple like, man, friend, that must be hard. I'm so sorry that this is your experience. And then you can throw in just like little tidbits here and there. But at the end of the day, like, I am totally here for you. And when you're ready, I will be there with the U-Haul to get out whatever I need to. But until then, 20 minutes is up. I have to tend to the kids, or I have to make dinner, or whatever the case may be. Just know I'm praying for you, or whatever it is that you want to say. So you also have to have healthy boundaries, because if not, somebody in a relationship like that can also drown you or
Yeah.
drain you as well.
Yeah.
So
100%.
yeah. So, but I think, of course, just being an ear, because sometimes that's all we need. We don't have anybody to talk to, we feel like sometimes, and then they make us feel dumb and they make us feel like we don't know what we're talking about and all these things. So we hold all this in. But if we can have just one person that we can kind of vent to and get some of that energy out, it's going to help the process. It's going to help us feel better, think a little bit clearly, because I like to think if we're holding on to all of those thoughts, that's what's kind of being jumbled in our brain. So our genuine thoughts and feelings are being masked by all this crap. But if we could get it out and just kind of word vomit with a friend for 20 minutes, sometimes it helps us to think a little bit clearer for the next time the craziness happens.
I think that's a really important comment, no matter what the situation is, right? Like sometimes or writing it out, right? Like if you don't have that friend at that moment that you can talk to, just put your pen to paper and don't even lift the pen up for 10 minutes solid, and just write about what is going on inside you at that moment. Because to your point, I think then you can go back and look at it and go, what are the themes? What are the patterns that I'm recognizing even from the writing? It helps us to get more clarity on what can I do next, right? I think this conversation is super important for a number of reasons. With the pandemic, we saw a substantial increase in abusive situations.
Yes.
North America is up like 35% just through the pandemic, because people were isolated, even more so being at home, and they had, the abuser was there all the time, whether it was male or female. And you do feel, I'm assuming you feel trapped. You feel that you have nowhere to go. And so it is taking that step and making that choice like you've done to heal your life and start to look at why am I even gravitating to this type of a person that does not respect me or my body or my boundaries. Yeah. So I know we're getting close to our end of our time, but I'd love to hear from you. Like, what's one thing, if somebody's experiencing this today, what's one small step they could take to regain control of their life?
One step. I don't know if this is necessarily a step, but to know that you do have a choice. They may make you feel like you have a choice, and they may make you feel like you're an idiot, or that you don't know what you're talking about, or that you're crazy, or that you're too dumb to do A, B, C, and D. Okay. Like, if you've been chronically in abusive relationships or in an abusive relationship for a really long time and you're still surviving, that is proof that you are not dumb. You know how to do what you need to do in order to survive. And that in itself makes you a badass, right? So it's all about changing the energy. So usually, if our life is on repeat, then it's a lack of something with us, right? We attract what we feel about us. It will confirm the subconscious thought process, right? But you don't have to stay there. You don't have to stay there, right? The person that gives you value is you. So that's a choice. You can make that choice. You can say, man, I'm not really feeling this today. I am in control of me. My body is mine. My thoughts, feelings, and emotions are valid. And my heart, the desires that my heart has, is valid. My cookie is precious and it is mine. All of these things are mine, and I have a choice. You have a choice. Do your homework, find the shelters, find where you can go. I mean, really, you have a choice. You do not have to stay, and you are strong. I mean, look how long you've survived already. It's time to change that energy focus on them and start putting that focus on you. And you can do that. It may feel weird and uncomfortable because you've never done it for you, and no one's probably ever done it for you either. And your brain might be like, no, what are you doing? And that's okay, right? It's a part of the process. Bring the fear, bring the guilt and the shame and whatever else comes along with it with you on the journey. They can, hang out forever long they need to until you get to that point. But you have a choice. You don't
I love
have to
that.
stay.
I love that. And that's such a great comment. And so, Nilzara, how do people find you? So if somebody's looking for that coach that has these experience, like where can they find you?
So coachnilzara.com is my website. And then I have the Mind Heart Cookie on Instagram.
Okay.
And Facebook is Nilzara Rivera. So I'm one
Nice.
of the only Nilzaras there. So you just type in Nilzara and I will come up.
Kind of nice that you have a beautiful name that is easy to find, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yes,
awesome.
you'll find it all. So
Oh, that's awesome. Listen, thank you so much. Like I first of all, like I have this overwhelming joy for you, and I feel so proud of you for, really taking control of the ownership of your life and your self-love and thriving now, and how you have transitioned into helping other women who are dealing with similar type situations. Like, that's just incredible. And there's more of this than we even realize. Like, and it's
yes.
not okay, audience. It is not okay to be abused in any way, sexually, financially, emotionally, mentally. It is not okay. And,
Mm-hmm.
you are the only person who can stop that. And so, Nilzara, thank you. And I'm glad marriage number 3 is working out. And
Yes,
all of
we're
that
going
is
on 5
good.
years this month. Woohoo!
Yay, congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you.
But it's beautiful, the work that you're doing. And so thank you. Thank you for coming on and sharing, your journey and what you've gone through. And that we don't have to be tied to our story from when we grew up. We can change that story at any time.
Yeah.
And not saying it's easy. I'm not saying that. It is a very difficult path to walk, but sounds like very rewarding path to walk.
Yes, rewarding for sure. It's not always like this beautiful, healing. They sometimes make it sound like, oh, it's so great. And it's like, it is, don't get me wrong, but it comes with its own ups and downs and like what
Sure.
the hells. And, as we change, dynamics change, period. So our relationships, the way we interact with people, everything changes. So we have to be ready for that.
Yeah, always. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. Audience, we want to thank you for joining us today. And if you have questions and in your, looking for, something we didn't share today, feel free, reach out to Nilzara, reach out to me. We're happy to have conversations. I'll share your questions with Nilzara. But you know what, as I said, it's not okay. And violence is up 30% plus. Since the pandemic. And, we have to be the ones to say enough and no more of this. And
Right.
so I just, I just stress upon you that if you know someone dealing with, any kind of violence, be there as that, safe space for them. And just thank you for being here. And Nilzara, thank you again. It was great having you on the show, and
Yeah.
wishing you the very best. Like, you've got such a beautiful energy about you, and I'm sure that you're helping lots of people overcome some of the challenges that they're going through. So thank you for that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Take care, everyone. We look forward to seeing you on our next WIL Talk podcast. And if you're interested in learning about your leadership, you can go on WILempowered, that's 1L.com, and take our free leadership quiz. It'll give you a lot of insight as to how you're showing up in the world as a leader. So be sure to check that out at WILempowered.com. We look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. Take care.